My name is Dawn Lane, and I am the Program Development and Implementation Manager for the Massey Learning Institute. Today, as we come to the end of March, the month for women, we will look at how to overcome gender bias at work. Bias is prevalent in every aspect of our lives. Our brains tend to compartmentalize it, and as we try to make better sense of it. But we must be ever so careful, because those same biases can cause us to form prejudices against others, which can allow for inequalities to form between different groups and demographics. But I think I will leave that conversation for the expert today, and she is Mrs. Sonia Lane Gartside, who is an accomplished global consultant. She works with the C-suite and senior leaders in Fortune 500 companies as a strategic partner to lead organization development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and HR strategy execution activities. Sonia holds advanced certification in change management from ProSci, and she is certified as a master trainer, DEI specialist, case writer, and instructional designer. Her undergraduate degree is in business management, and her master's degree is in education. She is an international speaker and author of the book Workplace Anxiety: How to Refuel and Re-engage. In acknowledgement of her work and innovative practices, Sonia was recognized as the 2021 Leader of the Year by the Pittsburgh Human Resources Association, PHRA. She describes herself as a cheerleader for people and ideas. So we want to welcome Sonia to our session today. Sonia, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dawn. I am so grateful for you having me here, and I appreciate this opportunity to share with you. Good morning to everyone. I look forward to going through this session because I think it's a really important topic, how to overcome gender bias at work. And it's one that men and women need to pay attention to, because ensuring that we tap into every single resource we have in our organizations is really important to navigate the uncertain, ambiguous, and volatile world that we are right now currently in. So we're going to talk about how to overcome gender bias. I come from a higher education background. I spent years working in university, so I like to start by defining things so we have a similar foundation. Or what do I mean when I say gender bias? Gender bias is the prejudice displayed towards one gender over the other. Often this bias is unconscious. And this is where I want you to pay attention, that it is unconscious, molded by our culture, our upbringing, and personal experiences. And so people who are, committing or undergoing gender or utilizing gender bias don't even realize that they're doing it. So then if you were to bring it to their attention, you will find defensiveness, denial, because it is unconscious. We are not even aware when we are repeating the behaviors. And men and women, and if you're not careful as women, if we are not clear, we don't build clarity, we can internalize behaviors that are done towards us, and then we repeat it. So we will get into a leadership position, and believe it or not, we will repeat the behaviors that were done to us because we, after a while, start to see it as invisible. So how does gender bias look in the organization? When we say gender bias in the organization, what does it look like? This is not an unending list, but these are some of the areas. Male candidates are preferentially hired over female candidates with equivalent experience. So if you look between the two of them, no difference. Women are held to a higher standard than their male counterparts. What is something that is done by men, there's a big expectation that, no, you should be kinder or better than a male counterpart. Ideas advanced by men are given more attention than ideas advanced by women. So a woman would say something in a meeting and it gets glossed over. A man brings it up 2 seconds later, not even a full minute later, and it's paid attention to. These are the scenarios that women experience, and women are ignored or spoken over in meetings. So we're interrupted more often, we're spoken over, we don't get to finish or complete our thoughts. And so this is how it looks. Now, when it comes to bias, our gender bias as we're talking about, I don't like to rely on our feelings and, and opinions, because like racism, gender bias is not about opinions. We have to look at the data and the facts. So you will note that throughout this presentation, I will be citing a lot of data. And so research definitely confirms and shows that gender bias is not a thing of the past. I know people think, oh, are we still experiencing it? Yes, it's not a thing of the past. Research shows that, for example, women account for just 3% of Fortune 500 CEOs and fewer than 15% of corporate executives at top companies. And this is based in coming from an American perspective, of course. Men are given higher performance ratings than women with identical qualifications and behaviors. This is a worldwide trend. Women, particularly Black women, are not taken as seriously when they walk into meetings. They walk into meetings and you often have to prove that you belong there. You're not given the immediate belief. So you have to defend yourself or prove to people about your qualifications. Women are interrupted more often in meetings. And this research is really important because this was done at the US Supreme Court level. And it's really illegal to interrupt Supreme Court justices when they're speaking. And what this research found was that women were interrupted by lawyers. And that's a big no-no. And so even at that highest level in terms of USA's Supreme Court, women get interrupted even when they're not supposed to. And women and minorities get less support when they're appointed to the CEO position. And in international organizations, as this research shows, white men check out immediately when women or minorities are appointed because they have a sense of, oh, I'm not sure about this. So research does show that, and women must deal with the double bind. And if you've never heard of the double bind, it is when women are penalized for doing the same act as men. So women will be said, are often told, you've got to be more confident, you've got to be more assertive. But when they do that, then people think that they're aggressive. You have to show more leadership, but when you do that, people think you're bossy. And so there's a double bind where you're penalized for the very same thing that people say to you. If you would just do this, then you will not have to endure gender bias. And so that's what the research is definitely telling us. And so that's the foundation for what I'm going to talk to you about today, that there are still systemic barriers for women. The barriers are real, it's not in your mind, and they are problematic. But the most important point is that they're not women's fault. They're not your fault. It's not something you are doing. And because women have been socialized so often to think, well, maybe if I said it a particular way or I did something else. No, these barriers are real. And so believe that and know that so that you can stop blaming yourself. And it also releases us from that myth that we were raised as and socialized as children. Unconscious bias, it comes from our culture and how we were raised and stuff. And that myth that we were all raised as women, that if we just keep our heads down, work hard and lean in, we will be rewarded for our efforts. That is not enough in this world. You cannot look for others to give you what you want because you have to act. And so this is an area and the foundation upon which I am going to talk to you about how do we overcome gender bias in the workplace. So the first thing I'm going to start, the first place I will start is organizational leaders must step up. This is not an issue that can be attacked only from an individual point of view, which is women need to do X or Y in order to overcome this issue. No, this is an issue that men and women, particularly in organizations who are leading, have to really create the environment that removes the bias from our organization. So that's the first place I am going to start. And how do we do that? So the question that leads that is, why do organizations, despite all this data, place so few women in leadership positions? Why do we still have all those barriers? Now, obviously, the answer to that is because historically, organizations were built for men. Now, men and women have been working since time immemorial and they work hard, but when it comes to business organizations, at one point they were only for men, and they were built for men. Systems were designed for men. Norms, processes, practices were designed for men, and these still dominate how we move around and how we navigate the organizational world today. They may be amended, upgraded, adapted, but they're still fundamentally how we run our lives. And so obviously that's a major reason why women still face gender bias today, because the systems are not necessarily designed for us. But I love this, what this author, Thomas, came out. He wrote a book called Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders and How to Fix It. And what he has noted is that the reason why so few women in leadership positions is because we don't really select leaders on the basis of their actual potential, talent, or competence. And that is a fundamental reason. Now, he has a theory that men outnumber, well, based on his research, that men outnumber women in leadership because we mistake confidence for competence. We, as he said, people in general, commonly misinterpret displays of confidence as a sign of competence. We're fooled into believing that men are better leaders than women. And this resonated with me because I always have to say to women leaders all the time, you are competent. You may not feel confident. And that's what may be holding you back. We as women tend to be more competent than confident. And the society is designed really to ensure that, well, not designed actively to ensure, but to reinforce that we should be as confident as we should be. Which is why when you see a woman, some say, I did such a great job. You know, I had an experience with that with someone I met, and I said, how are you doing? And they were like, great, I've done X, Y, Z. And then I literally saw them go, wait a minute, am I sounding like I'm bragging? Am I sounding cocky? And then they started to backtrack. Well, you know, and I had to say, stop. No, yes, speak your truth. That is what you have just said to me, what your value is. And I want you to continue with that. But we're socialized to see that speaking our truth and demonstrating our value as being cocky or bragging. And so this word really resonated with me. And you would think that it may be something that is a little bit controversial or extreme. But when you look at some peer research in the spring of 2019 in Attitudes, they found that 40% of people, not 40% of men, or 40% men and women, agree that men have more right to a job than women when roles are scarce. So that underlying unconscious bias still drives and it penetrates into our organizations. And so what we want to talk about today is, what do we need to do to overcome gender bias? We need better systems. Those systems that were designed for men way back when only men worked in the organizations need to be revamped. And so organizations need to examine their policies and practices and remove bias. And remove bias from where? In your decision making, in your hiring, in your performance evaluation, your promotion, your succession planning, your compensation, your access to developmental opportunities. Research shows that women do not receive development feedback. Men do. And how are we going to develop to become better leaders? It's through developmental feedback, but that's given more to men than women. And when it's given to women, it tends to be punitive and critical rather than constructive. So bias is built into the system, and research shows that, and continues to operate even when more women than men are present. The systems are the issue right here, and how it's perpetuated, because we come into organizations, we learn what is required to ascend to the top of the organization. And when we get to the top of the organization, we don't change the systems, we just replicate them. This is why sometimes you find in organizations, women will say, as a leader, as being a woman leader, you're looking for more support from women, and you will find they're actually perpetuating the bias that you get with men against you, because we internalize it and think it's the only way. And vice versa, leaders and employees in organizations may say, oh, I have a female leader, so I expect difference. I expect, again, holding women to higher standards. And then when they don't, then they're like, oh, what's happening is because the system that you have to tread to make it in the organization is what contains the bias and helps perpetuate the bias. And remember, it's unconscious. So it's like a pathway that has been laid you keep walking that path instead of going out and striking into another path. And an example of this, when we say examine your systems and remove this, they found that in that transparency affects pay equity. A recent study of large study of U.S. academic institutions found that over time, the gender pay gap in organizations when salary data was revealed was reduced by 45%. And so when you look at your systems, this is what we want to say, well, what will help mitigate the bias? You know what? If we made our pay transparent, that way everyone can see, and it will help reduce any bias we get, which is I like you. And with our unconscious bias, it's like you have a female candidate, a male candidate. Unconscious bias is, I don't know what it is, but I like that male candidate. So let me find a reason to back up the fact that I like him over her. And so something like this, where you go through the systems and really ensure that you're mitigating bias, and this is something that I do with organizations all the time, is to really ensure that you are setting up and ensuring that your systems don't replicate it. The second thing is we need to build better cultures, work cultures. And I like to say this is in both men and women, stop expecting women in leadership to engage in stereotypical male behavior, where you expect them to be a man in a female body, be more assertive, active, displaying. You want them to be like a man, and people think that. And I fortunately, women leaders who are in tech organizations who said for a large component of my career, I just quote someone who said that I thought that just denying my femininity and just coming in, that will make me successful. It has, but I can't sustain it. Or expecting females to display stereotypical female behavior. Oh, well, she's a leader, I expected her to be kinder. No, she's a human being. You have to figure out who that person is. Conversely, men get penalized with gender bias as well, which is why this is an issue that is more important for men as well, because we need to stop penalizing men when they stray from that strong masculine stereotype. There's also an expectation as to how men should lead, strong, and if you're seen to be what they call soft or whatever, there's a callous disregard. And so the culture of your organization needs to be one in which you are cultivating and removing these biases, these expectations that really do more harm than good. And then we come to the most important part, which is pay closer attention to how we choose leaders. We have to spend more time picking leaders based on actual competence. We will not just improve leadership quality, but we will also improve gender equity. And let me tell you why. Because when we look at the scientific studies and the meta-analysis, they have consistently shown that women score higher on measures of leadership effectiveness. They score men on leadership competencies, and they see higher levels of engagement from their team. And on most of the key traits that make leaders more effective, women tend to outperform men. So what are those key areas that we talk about that when I'm doing training and coaching for leaders, you want humility, you want some self-awareness. That is so very important. So because that's the only way you can get some self-control to respond rather than react. Moral sensibilities, emotional intelligence, kindness, all of these are demonstrated more by women than men. And women also outperform men in educational settings. It's why women are always overqualified. They know when they go into a room, they have to justify why they're there. And so before they do anything, they're going to get a degree. And I always say this to women, you don't need another degree. No. You need to address what the rule is. You feel you need that for security? No. You need to address the fact that when you walk into a room, you're asked to prove and demonstrate your competence. And you can do that without another degree. Women are the most qualified people of the world. You just need to look at what's going on in America now with the confirmation of the latest Supreme Justice nomination to see that it happening. And so I love this quote that came from the Forbes article. The mountain of evidence keeps growing. Women leaders outperform, especially during a crisis. And we saw that with COVID. Companies with more of them do better, but we have less of them. So the organizational agenda to overcome gender bias is to reduce intuition from the evaluation process and increase analytics and evidence-based practices. That is where we want organizations to go, evidence-based practices. And stop so much with all of this intuition. Slow down your decision-making Analyze the data. So in order to analyze data, you have to first introduce a system for collecting it and then utilizing it. And increase that to help you make decisions. It doesn't mean we're human beings. Of course, we're ruled and dominated by our emotions. We like to think we're dominated by our analytical thinking, but no, we're feeling people who think sometimes. But so that is why we want to actively increase the evidence-based practices. And so that's what I want to say, what organizations should do to overcome gender bias. And that's where we should start, because that's what's going to give us the most traction to overcome this issue. Of course, women and men have a role to play. And so I'm going to spend the second half of this session just talking and giving you about 5 tips on what you can do as an individual to help you navigate those barriers. So in other words, I don't want anyone to walk into the organization as a man or a woman and don't understand that there are systemic barriers in place for women. And so you have to acknowledge it there, because women love to think, no, they're not. And then they trip over them, get injured, and then wonder why, because you didn't even recognize them. So recognize them, and here are some tips. The first one is give yourself permission to focus on your career and take agency over your advancement. Too many women hold back. We're socialized that way. Don't put yourself forward. Don't raise your hand. Who do you think you are? Remove that. You have to, in this world, you have to learn, and then you have to unlearn. So start today to figure out what do you need to unlearn, and you unlearn that you need to wait for permission to focus on your career and take agency over your advancement. I'm giving you permission for all of those who are working that. And so number one thing I like to say is choose the organizations you want to work for. Be actively active in choosing. So you want to look for those organizations that are addressing the issue and be intentional in finding work there. So don't just go anywhere, go which organizations. And the biggest indicator of an organization like this, they have gender diversity in their leadership teams. So that's the first place. I always say to people, don't look for jobs, look for leaders. That's where you should go, because that will advance your career. And so you look and see, is this leadership team diverse? If it is not, then you know what you're walking into. A lot of bias that people cannot see. I read a book the other day where a guy, he's trans, so when he was a woman and he wanted to transition into a male, he was worried about his career because he worked at one of those, I believe, university, I think it's MIT, I can't remember. Anyway, so his biggest concern was when he researched, so be taken, whatever. When he transitioned to a man, what he then realized that he never had a clue of how much bias he experienced in a woman's body. As a man, people took him more seriously. He didn't have to spend much time defending his points of view. They accepted. He wasn't spoken over in meetings. And he was astounded that he didn't even realize it. And he didn't realize it until it was removed. And so you're dealing with people, men, who don't even see it because they don't experience it. So it's invisible to them. And so you want to go someplace where men have opened their eyes. And that is also demonstrated in a diverse organization. Another way is say yes. We're conditioned as women to think about, are we qualified enough? When opportunities come around, even if you're unsure, if you have the skills, capability, or credibility to do it, take it up. Research tells us that we need to say yes, even when we feel differently. When I was 24, I used to work with around the Caribbean with Trinidad University professor, Dr. Trevor Farrell, may he rest in peace. And we were in Dominica, and a dinner after strategic planning session he had led, and I was a support, just out of university. And he said to me, he said, Sonia, a man will know this much. And he put up his hand and he showed me. And he will act like he knows this much. A woman will know this much, the entire hand, and act like she knows this much. You have got to say yes to things and not base it on how confident you are. And he told me that at 24. And it was such a help to me in terms of how I moved through the world. And so I pass it on to you to say yes. Even if you are often undervaluing your worth and your confidence because society conditions and socializes us that way. Another thing I like to say to women is look for sponsors, not just mentors. And what are sponsors? Sponsors get you access to opportunities that you often cannot access on your own. You need You need mentors because mentors help you. They give you advice, they give you feedback, they give you, from their experience, how to navigate certain situations. But sponsors are the key. They will speak your name in rooms you are not in. And that is why you need some sponsors. And they should be a mix of men and women. Men and women who are in a room and say, you know what? Sonia will be great for that. I'm not in the room, but they're going to speak my name. So look for sponsors. And I have been lucky enough to have sponsors as bosses. And this is one thing that really advances your career and helps you navigate that bias. Another area is the job hop. I like to say, always stay ready. Your resume must be always ready, looking for that next opportunity. Your job with the organization is win-win. If it's no longer working for you, then you leave. You don't need to stay there. You don't need to feel guilty for leaving. You don't need to feel guilty for job hopping. Like, our grandparents would say, well, it looks like you're not steady. No, that doesn't work in today's world. Changing employers can help narrow the gender gap in executive compensation, research has found. Job hop your way to bigger opportunities, bigger paychecks. Do not stay in organization. Always keep your resume updated. And as I like to say to women, keep a bride book. One that shows your value. So if you meet the CEO in the elevator and they say, how are you doing? You know what to tell them. If you're looking for another job, your resume, I meet some women and men who haven't updated their resume. And the last time they updated their resume was 14 years ago. Well, you can't get up and move unless, of course, you're looking for people, right? As opposed to jobs. So that's great, but most of us do. And then, of course, you got to leverage your network. Research shows that we're great at building relationships and connections, but we hesitate as women to leverage them for career advancement, development, and recognition. Men don't have this problem. They understand it's a reciprocal nature, and so they're willing to ask because they know that they can give. Women feel like they're using people, they're shy, it looks bad. And we want to say to women, I want to say to you, stop that. Leverage your network. How are you going to find sponsors if you don't really work your network and talk to your network and ask help for them? And it really relates back to that, say yes. Because if you're stepping forward and you don't feel as confident, then you don't have to do it alone. Your network will give you that support when you're feeling uncertain. You can leverage them to help you as you move forward. And so that's my final tip for you. How do we overcome gender bias? Let me summarize. You have to start at the organizational level. Leaders need to have better systems, better cultures. So we got to examine our policies, our practices, and remove the bias that is just built into it. And we need to pay close attention and spend more time picking leaders on actual competence, increase analytics and evidence-based practices. The problem of leadership today is not only that women have barriers, it's the absence of obstacles for incompetent male leaders. There are too many incompetent male leaders just getting ahead based on the old boys network, which is why I say that women need to leverage that network. But we need to ensure that we really build systems that prevent that from happening. Because when you look at the research that shows how leadership is done in today's world, it's abysmal. Engagement is awful. And it's because we have too many incompetent male leaders in place. And so we want to remove that. We want competent men and women in place for that. And then from an individual point of view, these are the 5 areas. Choose the organization you want to work for. Say yes. Look for sponsors, not just mentors. Job hop, as I like to say, always stay ready. Keep that pride book so you remember what you've done and the value that you've added. Because again, remember that you are not important. It's your output that's important. And leverage your relationships. So I am now going to stop, and I am going to hand it over to you to see if there are any questions for people.
So, Sonia, I am thanking you for such a provocative topic. And I'm sure that we will have lots of questions. I'm going to hand you over to Renee, who will moderate for us. Renee?
Thank you, Dawn. Good morning to everyone, and thank you so much, Sonia. Our first question in our Q&A this morning is from an anonymous person. How do you deal with situations where you are sexualized by men in the workplace and you're only given attention because of that? If I dress up and going to a meeting, a man may give me the chance to speak, but a woman who sits there dressed in normal attire doesn't draw attention. She might get looked over.
And that's a bias. You know, there is people who are seen as good looking, tall, get more opportunities, get more attention. I'm not quite sure what their issue is, which is, are they upset about the person who doesn't have attention? Because if they are, then you get to be a good ally. You know, when I'm sitting in meetings and some person has been overlooked or some person is not giving the attention, I will say that. I will say, Renee, we haven't heard from you. Or I would say, Renee, that was a good point that you made. Could we make space so that Renee can operate more and share her point of view? That is also an organizational issue in terms of something that I think HR and leadership should recognize, because men may not even realize they're doing it. They're naturally attractive and they pay more attention. And so that needs to be drawn to their attention so that they can become aware of it and control themselves in terms of how they're dealing with it. And so that's something that I would also say from a company-wide point of view, that HR and leadership, somebody needs to sit down and explain it to HR. This is what is happening, and let them deal with it. But on an individual basis, then you can use, I always say to white men I'm working with, use your privilege to cover other people. So the system is operating on that, but you can actively do something in the meantime to help. But ultimately, I would bring that to the attention of HR, because that is something that I have had to discuss with men before. And so you get somebody who's qualified to handle the discussion, which is to highlight the unconscious bias without it coming across as punitive, and more in an education, edifying way so that they can respond better. I hope that helps.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sure it did. Thank you so much. On to our next person, anonymous again. I think this is more of a comment, but you can respond. I have the qualifications just like a man who should fit the role, but they overlook me because the job requires going out in the field and getting things done. They told me that I am not suitable for the job because I am a woman.
What? No. Well, you need to examine that, because that is a big no. I would say that is something definitely that you will have a nice little discussion with HR. And if HR is a party to that, then that is a signal to you that you must leave that organization. That sometimes I like to say to people, rejection is God's protection. That is a massive signal from the universe to say that you have too much value for where you are planted. Look for someplace else if that the leadership team is supporting that.
I like that response. Thank you. On to another comment. I might be contributing to gender bias, but as a woman, I prefer working with men instead of women. Men get the job done without getting into feelings. Women look at each other's outfits. Some of them don't like you, etc.
Such a great point. And thank you for that honesty and authenticity. So let me tease out the pieces in there. Number one, we're social. Let's deal with men and no feelings. That's the old school way, that when you come into work, you check your feelings like it's a coat and you put it on a hanger. That is a very destructive way of leading, and it's old fashioned, and it's going through the door. Anybody who comes and says that is not leading properly. They have lots of feelings. They just mask them and utilize them often in a very punitive way. So let me just start there with that whole idea that men don't have feelings. And again, it's another way that we penalize men who do have emotions and want to show them that you're not being the typical man. So feelings and emotions are essential components because they penetrate the organization. They're just on the ground. And so what it makes a good leader and a good employee today is to have the emotional intelligence to be aware of your feelings. And then that makes you able to self-control and self-manage and then build relationships. So that tells me that in the organizations today, we need to spend more time training people on emotional intelligence, because emotional agility is essential for it. Yes, women without clarity tend to internalize and repeat because we're rewarded for it, right? So I have to, as I walk through the day, recognize, hey, am I perpetuating gender bias as a woman? It doesn't absolve me because to succeed, people reward you for it. So you have to know. I was reading a book with a lady who said she didn't even realize she was doing it. She was hiring some person, a woman. There, she was a wonderful candidate, and then she told her she was pregnant, and she went, "Oh no!" And she had just had a baby, and she went, "Oh no!" And so then she had to realize, "Oh my God, I'm perpetuating it." So I'm glad that you're self-aware enough of it. But what I would say to you is that yes, women may do those things, but your job, if you want to ascend the ladder to be a leader, is to be more emotionally intelligent, build the skills of emotional agility so that you can mold that situation. When you come to the environment, that you can make an impact on it for the better, rather than just saying, "Oh, women are doing it." Now, I might be biased because I have worked predominantly in women-led organizations, women-dominated organizations, and I love them because when it is done right, when you have the leadership skills, it's a beautiful place to work.
Excellent. And that response flows nicely into our next question. Is overcompensating for male gender bias by hiring only women in itself, is that a bias? And how do we navigate this?
Yes, that is a bias. You navigate it the same way that you do any other thing, which is, it's not generally a bias. Let me just start there. It can be you're seeking to provide equity. So we've always hired men, and you say to yourself, okay, when we analyze the data, we're predominantly hiring men. So we need to have some affirmative action here and bring on some women. So in that context, it is not a bias. It's a proactive response to a situation. However, you then have to recognize and do the same thing. And I have been in organizations where we looked at the data and realized that we're only hiring women. You know, it's like, what's happening? And then when we delve into it, it's because women are more educated, so they rise to the top. We require a degree, we require certain actions, and women are better educated than men, particularly in the Caribbean, and so they rise to the top. But hey, we cannot have an organization just dominated by one gender. It doesn't bring the diversity, the creativity of thought. We need some diversity. And so what we did was the same thing, which is to say, hey, we need some men in this organization. So let's wade through and see if we can find some affirmative action that is necessary, because it's a delicate balance that you need to maintain. And so overcoming gender bias is never to say, let's get rid of men, or let's put men down, or let's, blame men. No, it's really just to right wrongs, get some equity, and really tap into both genders. Well, now in today's world, it's more than one gender. There are people who are gender fluid, or people who don't particularly identify with one gender. So really tapping to really ensure that we have a nice balance of people, so that, because it really leads to better creativity, innovation, ideas. And that's what we're aiming for. And we want the organization to be great for every single person. And don't forget that men are penalizing this. They're often put into a box as to how they should be operating, and we want to remove that as well.
All right, thank you so much for that response. Really appreciate that. Moving on to our next question. How do you find a sponsor? I know you shared a little bit before about networking and so, but this person is asking, how do we find a sponsor?
How do you find a sponsor? It's a great idea. You have to look for them. And the first place to usually start is your boss. Is there some person that will advocate for me? Some people have bosses that can't. I have a client that say, some people have bosses that can't even advocate for themselves, far less more you. So you have to be aware as to whether you have a boss that can be your sponsor, because they're in meetings that you are not. And so you want to ensure that you and them have a win-win relationship where you are providing great capabilities, great work, and they appreciate it, and they're willing to speak your name. They're willing to let you advance in the organization and not just hold you and block opportunities from you because they want to keep you to themselves. So start with your boss and see if there's some people who can sponsor for you. Also look around your organization, across the entire organization, and build relationships with people. Look for opportunities to share and get to work with other people so that they can see how much good work you do. really tap into your network. And when you're talking to people, look for what you can do to help. For example, it could be as small as I went to a talk that you gave, and it was great. And I heard you mention a particular area. I heard something that I think that can help. That can be an outreach to see. So it's really being open and looking for them. As I like to say to people, if I ask you if you see a yellow car, you may say no. The next week, I can guarantee that you will see nothing but yellow cars. So the most effective way to find a sponsor is to look for them and to start building relationships. And it's harder than mentors. So mentors are easy. Mentors, you can pick up a book to, you can watch somebody's video, and Oprah could be your mentor. You never met her in person, but you can watch all her videos and read her books, and really she mentors you through a process. So it's really harder to find a sponsor, but I find it's way more rewarding.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next comment before I give a question. I hate when men say that we can't have the same rights as them because we complain about our periods and want to stay home.
That reminds me of, there was a something going around where men, there's a machine that simulates period pains. And so the latest thing last year was where men would attach it to themselves to really experience what period pains were, and they couldn't handle it. They were like, oh my God, is this what you go through? And so when men say those things, they're speaking from ignorance. Recognize them as such. They're not people you should be paying attention to, because they have double story ignorance, as we like to say. They don't know that they don't know. Ensure that they're not guiding your life. And if they are, again, that is information you should act upon.
Agreed. What about female managers who don't support female employees under them? Male managers would send me home or give me time off when I feel sick on my period, but women managers tell me to go back to work and that I shouldn't complain.
Mm-hmm. I like to call it unhealed trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You had to, when you wanted to go home, those female managers, when they wanted to go home, nobody would give them the freedom, nobody gave them the empathy and the compassion to send them home. And they had to fight through it. And so now when they're leaders, instead of going, oh my goodness, it was so hard when I was doing it and I was forced to do it, they then turn around and say no and replicate it. And so those are leaders that I sometimes think they lack compassion because they have been scarred by the trauma. And they think that if I made it through, then you should make it through. I tend to have an understanding of them, and I don't look to them and they tell you who they are. I think it's Maya Angelou that says, when people show you who they are, believe them. You cannot change them. And so I wouldn't attempt to, but you can have some compassion for them and understand them, and then seek really to not work with leaders like those until they've done some self-development. I will not take on the responsibility, of course, to tell them this. That's their job, and someone who wants their success and their development should do that. But you should just utilize the knowledge to navigate it. That is unhealed trauma.
Excellent response. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Moving into our next question, how about you doing all of this and your name is still not called at all? What do you do?
Well, you have to call it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn that when I moved to the United States, because I grew up, nurtured, moved in Barbados with a great sponsor, Dr. Janine Kama as a boss, and then I moved to the United States. And for those who don't know, my husband is a professor of math at the university, and of the two of us, I like to say I'm more employable. So I moved with him. And I moved to the United States, and I only knew one person in the entire state, my new husband. So I had no network. I had no people I can call on. And like when you live in the Caribbean, you can borrow other people's networks. So you may not know some person, but you know some person who knows some person. And they will introduce you and they will set you up. I had none of that. And of course, I come from a university background, and I applied for a job at the University of Pittsburgh, and the HR person said to me, well, Barbie, this is such a tiny island. How how can you, I don't see how you can translate the work you did to here. I mean, the absolute ignorance of that statement. And I was like, excuse me, University of West Indies does more benchmarking and analysis than you do. We have higher standards than you do. Let me just assure you. And so what I've learned and had to do is to speak my own name and to invite myself into rooms and do it for myself. And once I started that, then I started to build a community of people who then started to help me. But what I recognized was I no longer could sit and wait for other people to do for me. I had to get up and do it for myself. And it's way harder, but it's doable. Once you believe in yourself, once you understand that you have value, and once you know how to self-talk, so that when your negative voice of, you know, whoever it may be, your mother, your first boss who tell you you will never be a good leader, or your teacher who says you will never make it, you have to really self-talk and coach yourself through those those negative thoughts, because quite frankly, as we know, 75% of our self-talk is negative, and really focus to say, well, what is my next step in order to advocate for myself? And so that's what I would say. You can do it for you. You don't need to wait on any person. Get up and just say, what's the next step? Where do I want to go? What's the very next step I should take? And start there.
Wonderful. I love that response too as well. Thank you so much. Moving on to our next question. Based on the data, have you found companies or countries where gender bias has been significantly reduced?
Significantly reduced is the area that I have a question with. I find it has been reduced, but you still confront, because without clarity, we as women tend to internalize and repeat the behaviors that don't serve us. And so it is reduced, but there's a lot of ongoing work that has to be done. And generally the areas, this is another thing, men are so important, because the companies who have significantly made, so yes, there are, but they're not many. And the companies who have made significant advancement, it was driven by men. Believe it or not, it is driven by men. And that's why men are so important to this conversation. They hold the power and they have the ability to make systemic changes much more difficultly, much more easily than women. When you are the only one, or you're one of two, the compassion I have is that you're trying to hold on to your position and you don't want to rock the boat. And to make systemic changes, you are rocking the boat. And I find that, and it happens with Black people as well. When you're the only one or one or two, you don't have that power to make change. And so I would say definitely yes, and it is men driven, and that's why men are so important to making a difference in this area of gender bias. We need them. You know, research also shows that men who have daughters, there was like a 2.5% that increasing pay equity around them. So they start to see the world a little bit differently. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, speaking about men, we have a comment here. I feel like the only male in here, but no joke, women bring other women down. Sometimes I feel sorry for my female colleagues based on how they talk down about each other.
Yeah, it's the way we are socialized, and you know, like so if a woman says, "Whoa, I'm great," they're like, well, "Who are you to say you're great?" And they're just, again, as I like to say, we repeat and internalize it, and then repeat it, because it's part of our culture. It's part of our the way we were raised. You know, we were raised, and I know probably for the younger people this may not be, but I was raised where you know, there's a Ghanese proverb, tie the heifer, loose the bull. The heifer is the woman. You keep the girls inside, and they do a lot of service work. Let the boys run well, because that's what boys are doing. Every kid take boys. So boys are raised where girls are taking care of them and doing all the work. So it is really difficult unless you get the clarity to see and how these things shape you, to change. And that's where we need to start, by having these discussions in organization. And this is why this Massey Learning Institute is doing such a great job to bring these types of programs to you, to start the ball rolling or continue it, because that's where, so discussion helps reveal it. So great job. And I want to say to the man who's doing that, that is a great use of being an ally and utilizing your privilege. Don't you feel sorry for them? Extend that into, saying, hey, can we move forward on this? I think that's a little harsh. Utilize that power to reduce that type of behavior.
Excellent, excellent. Moving on to a comment from another male. As a male who has female colleagues, what advice can you give me about working with females? What should I not do and what should I do in order to not come across as biased?
Mm-hmm. So I love your intentions. So that's beautiful. Be explicit with your intentions, state that. And then I will say the other thing that I do in DEI work with companies is to treat others the way they want to be treated. So, we live by the golden rule, treat others the way you will want to be treated. Now, with diversity, what we say is you have to know the individual. And so get to know them and ask them their preferences. Which would you prefer? And they will tell you. And so I think that your intentions are beautiful, and to align your actions with your intentions, then get to know the women you're working with, pay attention to their preferences, note in meetings if people are speaking over them and they're not, the general bias of stuff. And then you can be a wonderful ally. You can't treat all women the same, just like you can't treat all men the same. And so just get to know them. But I love your intentions and that you want to ensure that your actions align with your intentions. So get to know those women and understand their preferences. And that way it will guide your actions. Because one of the key things is that for one person, what may be biased is not for another person. They actually prefer it. So you can't really just have one approach for everyone. You have to get to know people and say, okay, what's your approach? And I will customize my approach and how I behave with you based on your preferences.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Moving along nicely. You indicated that in meetings and in presentations, women are normally interrupted or talked over. How can we fix this without being seen as emotional?
That's something, I laugh, but that is so much facts there. Men are very emotional, but it's like a woman says that she's emotional. No, she's not being emotional. So one of the things I like to say is when you start with the understanding that the barriers are there, because sometimes women feel it's just them or it's just what they're seeing. That am I being interrupted more often? I just, yes, of course. And it's because you're a woman and the bias is unconscious, so they don't know. And so there's an emotional reaction of frustration or anger that comes across. And what they hear is your emotion and not necessarily your point. And this is, we're in America, well, everywhere, they say it's tone policing. We're not concerned with what you're saying, but how you're saying it. That's what's distracting us. And so what I like to say to people is you have to be prepared, sit and think, when does this happen to me? How would I like to respond? I don't want you reacting in the meeting. I want you preparing the response beforehand so that when it happens, you recognize the emotion. Oh, this is so frustrated. They're not letting me talk. I have a plan for how I want to do this. I didn't have your plan. And so for me, I have one or two ways of doing it. If I'm in a meeting and I feel confident and I have a lot of authority, I would say, I'm still speaking. Thank you. Let me finish my point, and then we can hear from you. If I'm in a meeting and I don't have any power, I am the lowest on the totem pole, then I may choose to say it before, and I know that people interrupt me. I may choose to say to the leader, I will say, I notice that I get interrupted in these types of meetings, so I would love to get your support. That if you see that happening, that you can support me and give me the space to interrupt. If I don't have any power whatsoever, then I utilize my email. Afterwards, I send a nice little email following up on our meeting today. I just want to say that this was wonderful. I had a few thoughts that I wanted to share and didn't get a chance to. And then I fire it off in an email. And that latter one is really helpful for introverts, people who are deep thinkers and are not extroverted like me. The moment it hits my brain, it comes out of my mouth. So that last approach is a great way for introverts to get their voice heard.
I love that idea. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I will use that one. All right, on to our next question. You mentioned systemic gender bias. How do we as future-focused organizations actively work to break this bias?
And it's really, so I love that question. I love that intention as well. So it's really examining your systems and removing it. So for example, when you look at leadership development, how you promote people, ensuring that it's like now we have recruiting, which is you're blind in terms of who the person is, so you can make a good decision. It's how the orchestra now makes decisions. Before they were distracted by the person, now it's blind. They put the person plays behind the curtain so that you can really listen, like the voice show on TV. They turn around and they just make decisions. So you want to do that. You really want to make your systems one which is, it doesn't go on intuition or your gut feeling. So you want to develop competencies, and then you want to develop how to analyze those competencies so that when persons are saying, we want to put forward this person, then there is a big why. Why? Give me qualitative and quantitative proof that this person is better than the other. And so what it wouldn't eliminate the old boys network. But what it will do is to say, for the person who says, man, I'm your friend, give me this, give me this pick, or give me this, they'll have to say, yes, I will support you, but you have to prove that you can do it, because they don't take it on my say so anymore. They will require that you have them, you've demonstrated certain outputs, you in the 360 analysis, that you're getting the marks that are needed. And that's what we want to do, is to help reduce it. So things like those are the way that you can start with the organization. Look at who is getting developmental opportunities in your organization, who gets to go on training, and analyze, is it skewed towards one group, and then analyze why. Because it may be skewed, but there may be a rational reason. You want to highlight the irrational reasons and correct those. So start putting data and start utilizing that to help you. We can never eliminate intuition, your gut feeling, and you don't want to, because feelings belong in organizations, but we don't want it to be the dominant force. And then the final, most important thing that I like to say to people in organizations is to slow down your decision making. Well, I really don't need to tell Caribbean people this. Y'all, our decision making is too slow, actually. So let's eliminate that. But generally, for most other organizations, we like to say slow it down. Here, it may be too slow, but yes, that's it.
All right, thank you so much, Sonia. I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A. We are actually out of time, so I just hand over now back to Dawn.
Wow, is what I am saying. Thank you, Renee, for moderating. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Sonia Lane Gartside, for being here today and for your openness on this topic. Total openness. I really loved it. And I'm sure our audience today really appreciated your responses. And I am sure that a few more of us will ensure that our elevator speech is ready and will say yes to the opportunities that now pop up, understanding that as females and some men, we do have this breadth of experience and knowledge, and that we can step up. So thank you so much, Sonia.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for being such a great audience.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our MLI webinar. Thank you for being here with us again today. Please look out for our April offerings. We have coming up business communication, introduction to project management, and handling disciplinary matters, just to name a few. You know how we roll. Also remember, if there's a program which you need, your organization needs, please reach out if you don't see it, and we will be happy to customize that program for you. So until next time, remember to level up. Bye for now. Thank you.